Hi, I'm Christopher Richardson, and before I play for you, I wanted to share with you a little bit about my personal musical journey. At first, I was admittedly rather apathetic towards learning the piano. I only really started it because my brother was learning at the time, and we had a sibling rivalry going on. Learning the piano, especially for a 9-year-old like my brother, took a lot of concentration to the task, so my parents spent most of their time with him to make sure he stayed on track. Naturally, I started feeling a bit neglected, as even visiting relatives and guests at parties wanted to talk to him and hear him play, forgetting about me completely sometimes. Eventually, I decided I needed to learn piano too, in order to beat my brother in this domestic battle for attention, and it was totally on that scale. I weathered through all the boring practice sessions, which incidentally became less boring now that I had a solid motivation for what I was doing. I learned scales, technique, music theory, how to use dissonance to add tension and effect to music, etc., etc. I decided in the early stages it consisted mainly of technique, and I had a knack for technique as it turns out. I learned very fast all the scales and stuff I mentioned earlier, and so my progress was sped up. My teachers gave me the foundation with which I could build up my musicality later and further increase my technique. But when I first started, I found out it was incredibly hard. I fell asleep during piano very often because it was very monotonous and taxing for my younger self. But one day, my parents took me to a concert where a very famous local pianist played Chopin's first ballade in G minor. I was amazed at the different tones and colors he could produce all within the span of a single piece. How a single melody could be modified in completely different ways to make completely different atmospheres and textures. How cool it was he was able to play with such a high level of technique. He played the piece like he owned that piece, and I wanted to play like that too. As I learned, I slowly started to realize the genius of the great composers, how deceptively complicated even a Chopin nocturne was, and how the brilliance of the older composers influenced and gave rise to the music of newer composers. I also discovered the music of some of the less obscure composers, pieces that you would not hear in a concert every day. There's especially a lot of late 19th century Russian music that has been unable to rise in popularity due to events outside their control, specifically the overall popular shift in the popular style of music. Nikolai Medtner in particular, his fairy tales, Opus 20, and his improvisation, Opus 31, number 1, performed by Marc-Andre Hamelin, served as almost as big an inspiration as that Chopin ballade that got me into music. My favorite part of the learning process, however, was how my own sound developed as I grew up. I learned how to use different touches and techniques to create specific sounds. And I also learned how to use techniques instinctually to make it so that I change how I touch the piano as I feel something or how I feel the piece should end up sounding. I feel like the point where you own a piece, where you can say that you own a piece, is when you can play that piece multiple times, all in completely different ways, but at the same time, they're all equally amazing. Eventually, I entered my first piano competition, and things were going great. I won many of them, boosting my confidence in my skills and allowing me to work harder, knowing I was on the right track. I also lost many of them, deflating my ego faster than a balloon. And it is through piano competitions that I really learned about the subjectivity in music. Music is very versatile, and it can be played in so many different ways, all of which are equally valid. But that very same versatility makes it impossible to please everyone in the audience, particularly in this case, the jury. Some musicians may want to hear a larger influence on the melody, while others want to hear those little nuances a composer adds beneath that melody, especially if the tune is heard earlier in the piece. Take a look, for example, at the beginning of Franz Liszt's Rhapsody Espagnole. It starts off with a chord, then a rest, then more chords and a tremolo, all encompassed by the pedal like so. But most people would agree that this section section comes across as being very orchestral. If you agree on that, then the music contradicts itself. Orchestras don't have pedal, so to play it with pedal would kind of defeat the purpose. But at the same time, without pedal, it's very dry and abrupt. You can do it partially, but it doesn't really have the same effect. Since the sound of a piano naturally fades away rather than staying strong as long as the player bows or blows, the pedal might actually contribute to the orchestral sound. But then again, all of this also depends on the hall in which you play in and the piano on which you play. But if that's the case, what can you do? Anyway, I also noticed another obstacle in my development as a musician, pretty recently too, and namely the restrictions in the repertoire I can select, especially since I enter so many piano competitions. I only have so much time that I can practice, and so a lot of that time is learning the standard repertoire of classical music, including the works by the greats like Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, etc. And normally, this is not even a problem. There's a great variety, and all of those pieces are of great quality. But as I mentioned earlier, I became a fan of obscure music, including pieces that are just borderline classical. For example, I played in a few competitions 3 months ago William Hertz's Wizard of Oz Fantasy, using themes from that namesake piece. At the end, the jury told me that I was scored several places below what I could have gotten due to the nature of the piece not being widely accepted in competitions. This happens to be an example of the blurry line between classical music and pop music. Pop music has heavy influence from classical music. There's no doubt about that. But it's still completely different. William Hertz tried to blend the two in his Wizard of Oz Fantasy by utilizing themes from pop songs, albeit older pop songs, and incorporating them into a classical style. However, my use of it in competitions gathered mixed responses. It's a newer piece. You don't hear it at all in competitions, actually. And that can be good. Newer pieces are pieces that judges haven't had enough time to form an opinion on what is right or what's wrong in the piece. So therefore, it's less subjective. Newer, younger people also happen to like that much more. However, some of the older generations, or I'll just call them musical traditionalists, are not very accepting of such a piece in competitions. This doesn't really even apply to just newer pieces, because even Beethoven is being played differently by generations. I've noticed that the youthful generation is more fixated on playing exactly as written on the score, since it's surprisingly rare to find such a performance. At the same time, though, the older generation is more fixated on interpreting each and every marking that the composer writes according to how they believe the composer intended or what the composer's personality was like. This dynamic trait in music adds to the risk in pursuing a career in classical music, especially a concert musician. Anyway, this whole process of finding my passion and all the obstacles involved in it has really shaped who I am today. Reading the score and interpreting all these markings for several hours daily without rest has given me a more analytical personality. Simply being able to pursue a career in something that I love so much has made me overall happier and carefree. I hold no regrets in terms of my involvement in music, even if I couldn't pursue anything else, as it allowed me and will continue to allow me to live a much fuller life. And throughout all of this, my entire journey, I realized I found more than just my light. I found my voice, because with music, I can say things that I would not normally be able to say, either because I don't know how to say it or I fear what anyone else would say or think about it. Music often tells a story. It's organized into phrases that must be shaped and inflected just like a person speaks sentences. Also, I mentioned how pianists are able to use specific touches to create specific sounds. All of this and more culminates into the fact that music is expressive and emotional as the humans who make it and play it. In other words, a piece of music can express whatever the composer or performer intends. I take advantage of this. I use music to express my happiness, to release my frustrations, to cry my heart out, and anything else I can feel in between. With music, I speak louder than I could ever physically shout to you. And of course, I could have not done any of this without the help and support of my family and my teachers. My family has given me the emotional and financial support I needed to really continue in music. My mom especially was of great help. She runs around at festivals to make sure I get the practice rooms I want. She travels with me despite me knowing that she doesn't really like to travel. And in her own words, she lives her life for me. All of her help means so much to me, and I'm eternally grateful to her. My teachers, of course, taught me, and so they gave me all the tools I needed to really be successful. And they drilled these tools deep into my skull to the point of instinctive reaction. They were pretty straightforward, sometimes ruthlessly pointing out any mistakes I made, but they were very patient. They made sure I understand exactly what they were saying before I could move on, even if it took me weeks. One thing I especially loved that they taught me was how to play music more maturely. There was a time in a lesson where my teacher said, "Christopher, you're playing this piece like a 15-year-old. You need to play this like you're 70. That doesn't mean that I was playing badly, but the piece itself required a much higher level of maturity than most teenagers have in order to please more of the audience. Even right now, I'm currently learning how to refine my sound and to expand my imagination. Tasks that are way harder than they sound. These things are done at the artistic level by successful concert pianists all the time. Now, as you can probably tell, I am pretty bad at public speaking. And so let me express what I really mean through my music, with a piece that, although has granted me so many problems due to its inherent subjectivity, has also served as an immense inspiration for me to really find my voice in music. Frédéric Chopin's First Ballade in G minor, Opus 23.